Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Telegram. You can support me on Subscribe Star, Locals, and Buy Me a Coffee, as well as check out my Substack. So, tonight's stream, can feelings tell us about reality? Well, what prompted this was on my Twitter, I had somebody on the wall, somebody posted a video from TikTok where Dawkins, yes, Richard Dawkins, was being asked about, I guess, feelings. It's like a minute. And he said, I don't remember what the video was, otherwise I'd play it. He says that feelings are fine for art and literature and music, but can't tell us anything about the real world because that's where we need science. And there's so many things wrong with this. It's just so, one, obviously stupid, right? If you're in a room and you're blindfolded, how do you find your way out? You feel your way out. Almost like feelings are telling you something about the real world, isn't it? Huh? Interesting. So before I really dive into this, I want to play what an Oppenheimer quoting the Bhagavad Gita.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Now, what's interesting here is this is a completely opposite understanding of the value of myth or poetry than Dawkins. And of course, Oppenheimer was a part of the atomic bomb project. And I think what is interesting here is it shows you that the events behind the construction and use of the atomic bomb were so weighty, so pregnant in meaning, that the only thing he could come to describe not only what he was feeling, but what was actually happening in the world was an appeal to that side of knowledge, of feeling, of myth. And this isn't the first time that Dawkins says just completely off-the-wall nonsense things. This is a great owning of Dawkins by Lennox. I'll play this briefly.
You said you've got faith in your wife. Is there any evidence for that?
Yes,
which you base it? Yes,
plenty of evidence.
What is so?
So again, he just walks right into it. He can't help it. Like he just does the dumbest thing. He has his whole argument against God and against faith. Faith can't be trusted. Faith. But then he's like, oh, then Lennox is like, well, do you have faith in your wife? And he's like, well, yeah, I do. And then there's reasons for it. Because he's saying in the debate, there's no reason for faith. Which is such a pedantic, childish position to take. So when we talk about feelings, we can mean at least two things, right? One is the tactile sense that one has when skin is pressed against some other object. Also, we can refer to the intrasubjective sensation or feeling that we have inside of us that makes us happy or sad or afraid or whatever, depending on the situation. Now, you can't really have the one without the other. If you do touch something with your hands, say, you then do also generate this corresponding intrasubjective distinction. So then when we say, feelings can't tell us anything about the world as it is, that's just, again, completely ridiculous. So we can say, let's say you have a stick and it's in water and it looks like it's bent. Now, your eyes are telling you that it's bent, but how do you know that it's not bent? Well, you have to touch it. You feel it. Now, their feeling is a superior form of knowing to sight, because you can then feel the stick, that it hasn't bent, Therefore, you can be like, okay, the eyes are telling me this thing, but that's actually an optical illusion. And we can prove it's an optical illusion by actually feeling it and that it doesn't bend in the water. It just looks like it bends. So we can use, so it's not just that feeling is a kind of knowledge. Feeling is a kind of knowledge that can be used to correct other mistaken beliefs or other mistaken assumptions. So let's go over some of the ways in which you can gain information by feeling of the first kind, tactile touch rather than intersubjective. I already mentioned at the beginning of this. If you're blindfolded in a room, how do you get out? You have to feel your way out. On the thumbnail, courtesy of Censored Anon, his descriptions in the low bar, I have a picture of the blindfolded scientists touching an elephant: the trunk, the ear, the leg, the tail, the side. They're feeling, right? That's the only way that they're engaging with the elephant. They're feeling the elephant, but that's giving them knowledge about a certain part of the elephant. It's incomplete knowledge. They don't know the whole elephant, and they only know the part that they're touching, but it is nonetheless communicating something real about the world to them, not just some sort of superstition, which is what, the materialist wants to reduce feelings and belief to, just superstition that doesn't have anything to do with anything. Which, of course, is an idiotic position to have. We also have, you put your hand on a burner, you're going to get burned. And that feeling of pain is telling you something about the real world, that if you don't remove your hand, you're going to injure your skin, for example. Okay? So if you see that, cold, right? If you are cold, then you have, that tells you should put on a layer of clothing. Now, we also have the feeling as intrasubjective sense. So I like to refer to what I call the Han Solo effect. I have a bad feeling about this, right? The fact that there are people in our lives that we know who have this like uncanny ability to sense something bad before it happens, and they don't even necessarily know what is going to happen or how it's going to happen. They just know that it's bad. Okay, so what that means is, this is where it gets really interesting. They are clued in or keyed in to something about the real world that they don't fully understand, but understand well enough to get out of the way. And in a previous video I did on knowledge, I think it was Why I'm Not a New Atheist, I mentioned the hunter analogy, right? Let's say you have two hunters who are equally skilled in the profession of hunting or outdoorsmanship, woodsman, let's say, but one of them has what we might call this sixth sense. He knows when someone's watching him. Could be a predatory animal, could be another human being. He did, whoever or whatever is viewing him might be completely concealed, and there's no obvious physical observation that could tell you this. But he's right, and let's say he decides to leave and there actually was a predatory animal nearby, or maybe a human lying in ambush, and they get him, or he gets away rather. The other guy who won't see that, who doesn't have that sensation, is an increased risk of being caught, of being dealt with in this way. So as well, you wouldn't tell this guy, if you were lost in the woods with this woodsman, you wouldn't then say, well, I don't know, like, feelings don't tell me anything about the world, bruh. Like, that's not real knowledge. No, he'd slap you upside the head, or he'd just leave you and then just walk away because he wants to get out of Dodge before something bad happens. And that's really what Dawkins is saying, that can't be true, but we know it's true. We all know it's true. There's this like bifurcation of the intellect that has to happen when you do this. It's insane. So I'm not saying that we get rid of measurement, right? Because the quote unquote scientific method, the measuring side of things, right? Let's use the example of a captain of a ship. Obviously, he has to measure distances. He has to leave port, then sail across the ocean and go to another port. But a good captain also has like this sixth sense, where he just sort of is attuned with the sea, the environment around him. And I guess what I call it the Han Solo effect. What this is really the product of is someone who either, because of some aspect that they had at birth, are something that they developed over time. They are in tune with a specific part of their environment. They might be in tune with their own self and their own internal workings. They may be in tune with other people. They may be in tune with the external world around them, or all three. And in which case, that gives you a really big heads up. And feeling as a kind of knowledge is different from the measurement of science, in that you, again, as I already discussed on the New Atheist video, you don't have to lay out a syllogistic argument to get there. It's just true. It's just true. It's intuitively, imminently true. And you just move on. Because what the scientific mindset that Dawkins is expressing does is it just cuts out half of reality. Now, you can't actually cut out half of reality, otherwise you couldn't function. So a kind of contradiction develops. You have to act in a way that is separate from your stated beliefs to function. But you also have to pretend that you're not doing it and that the thing you're doing isn't real, right? So going back to, Lennox, and the little joke about Dawkins and his wife, how does Dawkins know that his wife loves him? Well, a feeling. That's part of it. That's a big part of it. And to say that that's not the case is insane. And yet he says it with a straight face all the time. It's just... Also, this is why myth and poetry and literature are so powerful down the ages. They tell you something that is so fundamentally true that you can still apply it thousands of years later. And you don't have to run through a sort of syllogism to get there. So, for example, we can talk about the sort of, how do you get that kind of like imminent knowledge? Well, again, some people are just born with it. They just have that sixth sense. Some people develop it. A lot of this knowledge comes from experience rather than, reasoning. Though, of course, it takes reasoning to collate those experiences into something intelligible. And again, I'm not saying we don't need measurement. We do. We need measurement, but we also need feelings. And this idea of intuition, insight, that poets and philosophers and prophets tap into, is what they say can't be. When we know full well that's absolutely true. It's just an idiotically stupid thing to say that it's not true. And so, what does this do in practice? Well, in practice, it has this flattening, leveling effect where people just don't see these things anymore. And they live this bifurcated existence where it's like they say, everything is measurable. Everything has to be run through this like filter. Well, I call it technological realism, right? And by technological realism, I mean at least a couple things. One, the triumph of technology in history was inevitable and it couldn't have been any other way. It's impossible to conceive of some other reality, a future that's not technical. All technical problems have to be solved by technology rather than some non-technical source. And then fourthly, that which cannot be accounted for by the mechanical system isn't real. And that's where we're honing in on today. Again, this is what it does is it creates a kind of schizophrenia where we're embodied creatures. We're humans. Of course we have feelings. We have feelings all of the time. And we have to engage with them and relate to them. Now, if you just say they're not real, they still manifest. I think that's where a lot of the anti-social aspects of autists, like in the scientific and mathematical professions, come from. They act out like this because they believe that their feelings and their emotions aren't real, so they're not taking account of something and then, quote, budgeting for it. It's not there. It's not real. So they just don't see it. But they're constantly acting on that in very antisocial ways. But they're trained not to see it. And so that leads, I think, to a lot of the anti-social. Whereas, someone like Oppenheimer still had this mythopoetic perspective where he can quote the Bhagavad Gita and actually see this for what it is, evidence of a deeper truth. And what's so beautiful about when he quotes the Bhagavad Gita is that he shows us that, the greatest achievement of science, blowing the atomic bomb, right, and then using it, is contextualized and understood by quoting this piece of Hindu scripture, which indicates that the mythopoetic is over and above the scientific for understanding it and explaining it. And of course, you read, if you ever read The New Atheists, I wouldn't recommend you do, or listen to them, which I wouldn't recommend either. They're constantly, talking about the scientific process and nature in these sort of like poetic ways. Because it's telling you, well, what they're telling you is how they're feeling. But then the thing is, what generates the feelings within them? Well, what they're doing, what they're experiencing, what they're measuring, I guess, right? They're measuring something, and that gives rise to these feelings within them. So the other thing, too, back to the intersubjective aspect, right? It's not that when you say that feelings don't tell you anything about the world, you're also saying that they don't tell you anything about you. But you are a part of the world. And at the very least, even if it doesn't tell you anything else about the external world, which I think they often can, it tells you something about you, something that you need to think about. So, for example, if you're engaged in some sort of antisocial or vicious behavior, you're going to feel bad, and instead of quitting, which is what you would do upon reflection, Americans just take drugs over-the-counter drugs to just not feel bad anymore. No, don't stop doing the thing that makes you feel bad. Just keep doing it. Again, right? Feelings don't matter, guys. We're just going to ignore what they're telling us. But they are telling you something. When you have these people that are chronically depressed, maybe at their cubicle job working for a soulless corporation, it's terrible. Okay, your feelings are telling you that this is terrible and you need to do something else. But they don't. So they just try to dull it with these over-the-counter drugs. I've already mentioned fire, right? If you get burned, that tells you something. But if with the insight, the being able to sort of like read the room or have these sensations about the environment you're in, that you might be in danger or that something is going to happen, it's about being in tune with that environment. And again, it's this kind of immediate knowledge, so it's interesting here is there's a whole side of human experience where being in proper attunement with yourself and in your environment allows you to, I guess, for lack of a better word, receive signals that are being sent in a way that science can't observe or measure. So it doesn't exist. Science can't observe or measure it, but of course it exists. And if we look at the sort of anti-technology polemic, which I think actually begins with the Great War, World War I, writers like Tolkien especially, a lot of these men who went into the trenches, war was fundamentally different with machines. Because there was a lot of quote unquote niceties, like chivalry and everything that they tried to do at the beginning of the war, like fighter pilots would just wave at each other, as they flew by. But what ended up happening is as the war kept going and the mechanical process became more in charge of what was going on, what ends up happening is that these guys just give it up. And they just fall in tow with the dictates of the mechanical forces at work. And I think part of their ennui and their fear and terror was not just, of course, the shells coming in, but the fact that in order to properly function in the battle space, they had to basically shut off who they were as humans. They had to shut off this sort of sensitive, feeling, spiritual side that they had in order to function. And the machine has been doing that ever since, not just in war zones, but even in peacetime. And so there's this higher order pressure on us to conform to these dictates, to get food, to get clothes, to get shelter, to get all the things that we need for life. So that, of course, to better fit in with the machine, you know, as Lewis says, you have to become a modem, the modem men. So I guess Dawkins is a case in point, the ultimate modem man. And you have to shut that off. And that's a deeply traumatic thing to do. Because the first level of the trauma is that society as a whole is forcing you to turn that off when it's an integral part of who you are. And in fact, in many cases, it might keep you alive, right? If you don't listen to these things, you might get yourself killed. Back to the woodsman example. Or you might, injure yourself, back to the burning stove. Or you might just be antisocial and nobody really likes you, except you get paid really well because you can crunch numbers and some corporation or some government agency needs you to do that. In which case you're still there, but you don't actually know how to relate to people or the environment around you. Part of the appeal is that the machine is very, well, less so now, but has historically been, fixed, predictable, right? As Alul says, as it gets so big and so large, he gives the example of putting your foot on the accelerator pedal of a car, and with pretty high level of certainty that's going to cause the car to speed up. But now we have so many complex moving parts that such a simple connection of a chain of events is much harder to do. It's no longer as simple. But the fact that it has historically been straightforward and simple like that and predictable, I think is appealing to a certain kind of mind. But that's at the expense of these other things. And we can also contextualize this with regards to World War II and what we might call statecraft and warfare, right? So Patton and MacArthur didn't really get along very well with the bureaucracy of the U.S. military. Both of them were these, heroic, mythopoetic people. Patton famously believed he was reincarnated. So they really were, they really did take seriously this sixth sense, for lack of a better word, this sense of spiritual reality and feeling. And so, and they were arguably America's best commanders in each theater of conflict. But the bureaucrats and the generals that were going to eventually become joint chiefs of staff were just doing it by the book, right? Just do what the machine says. Don't think too hard. Just go by what the machine says. Don't fight it. They were the ones who were ultimately successful, and these are ultimately the people that we have now in charge. Also, George Kennan, is famous for his containment theory and his writings on, I've mentioned before, the Franco-Russian alliance. He bemoaned the fact that in his own time, the sort of building relationships amongst, diplomats and statesmen in the old way was being replaced by this more abstract transactional relationships. And what these old guard of an earlier age, a Patton, a MacArthur, a Kennan, all represented was this more intuitive side that was being squeezed out by the machine. It wasn't necessary. Well, more than not being necessary from the point of view machine, it was harmful. Because those people are not predictable. Remember, this doesn't exist. The machine says if I can't measure it, it's not real. So these people are then unknown quantities because the machine can't measure and control them. Sorry, it can't measure them, therefore it can't control them, and therefore it can't predict them. And it doesn't want those people. And I don't want to say that everybody that's failed in America is like this, but a lot of people who have failed in the current U.S. paradigm have failed for just that reason. There are people that are poetic, spiritual, in tune with their feelings, to use the hippie buzzword, but that's not what the machine wants. That can't be predicted easily. No, it actually can be predicted, right? If you become a very good friend with someone or are married to someone for a long time, you can eventually, know what they're going to say before they say it. You can sort of complete sentences for them. You might even get to the point where you know them better than they know themselves. Okay, so But again, that's a whole different way of thinking and relating to people and to things that the machine doesn't want you to do. The scientific mindset doesn't want you to do. So it's just thrown out, which of course is a disaster, because part of why everything is breaking down now is because that other half of reality they say doesn't exist, exists. And it's crashing back in. Because you can't ignore that forever. And so what this tells us then is that feelings, especially the intrasubjective kind, inspiration, insight, whatever you want to call it, that motivates the poets and the philosophers and the prophets, is extremely important for determining the world you live in. For example, right? And when I use the term prophet, I don't mean it in the narrowly biblical sense, but the idea that somebody has a specific insight about the future that comes to pass, because for whatever reason, they are correctly aligned with the arc of history at that moment and can see what other people can't. It's a sort of an analogous to like the woodsman who can feel that someone's watching him, even though he can't see that, right? The future hasn't come yet. We can't see the future, but just like the ambush predator or the stalking human that the hunter can't see, he can still sense them. This new reality that's coming is sensed by the prophet. And he can then see the world as it will be before it happens. The best example that I have is The Machine Stops. For those who sat through my reading of the Machine Stops, he literally wrote this like in 1906, like way before anything remotely like this was possible in the technical world. But it sounds like it was written just the other day. It's so accurate. Like, that's what we're talking about. That's not knowledge you get from measurement. That's not knowledge you get from observation. Well, at least not in the scientific sense of observation and measurement. But it's so accurate to the world that we live in now. It's like, that's real knowledge. And it's real knowledge that you couldn't have even checked until the modern age, because we didn't have the internet, until like the 90s. So he was pretty, it's crazy, but he predicted it. And it was real knowledge about a real state of affairs that would come. Now, he didn't get everything right. I mean, we don't have dirigibles moving people around. We have airplanes, but thing is, though, he got things right. Things that would be very, very difficult for anyone to have predicted or to have gotten right at that time. And that's what I mean by the prophet. And that's actually, I think, the highest form of knowing, because you can see, part of the problem we're in now is everybody is assuming that the global technological industrial system is going to keep going in much the same way that it already has. We're saying that that's not a valid assumption, but many people have it, and so they're projecting past trends into the future, which they have no right to do, because the meta has changed so much that you can't actually do that anymore. And if you just observe previous time iterations alone, that wouldn't necessarily be enough. Because first of all, you have to have a certain kind of mindset to piece together the information, like what is evidence, what is real information versus what is noise. And so, obviously there are people that have been concerned about collapse based on energy consumption. I am too. But again, that, I guess, is where they're predicting the future by looking at these measurable factors. But in a sense, but even to ask that kind of question, even to go in that direction, you already have to be predisposed to thinking that something as big is going to change. So like, even before I knew about collapse, even before I knew about any of this, I knew that there was something radically different about the age we were living in versus all previous ages. And also that we were in an advanced stage of collapse. Now, when I knew this in college, I wasn't basing it off energy consumption. I was just looking at all of the previous empires of history and where they were before they collapsed, and I'm like, well, we're about here, on the decline of all the empire graph. So, but even before that, even before I was, had read the history, I was just disposed a certain way. So one of the things that I tell people is, when you grow up and you hear all these like ridiculous bromides, like, oh, Japan attacked America without any provocation at all. Totally unprovoked, guys. Seriously. Or, the hagiographies about Lincoln or whatever. Like, even before anybody told me that this was baloney, I just didn't smell right to me. It was a feeling. It was a feeling, guys, to have this feeling that this just can't be true, because that's not how people act. People don't do things for no reason. They have a reason. And, seldom do nations attack other nations unprovoked. Like, there has to be something you're doing. I mean, maybe North Korea's invasion of South Korea was unprovoked, because we do know that Sigmund Rhee, the United States, did not allow him to have heavy weapons because he was so hawkish. And we didn't want him to start a war with North Korea. Of course, that kind of blew up in our face, because when the North Koreans invaded, there wasn't a lot to hold them back. So they made it all the way down to Busan. Or rather the perimeter around Busan. And it's this idea of living by this sort of like instinct. Well, it's not instinct. It's this insight. But also paying attention to how these things feel. The sort of, as I've pieced together all of these different elements for this broad narrative that I've been discussing over the last year about technology, global history with Sutton, helping us understand the 20th century, all of this. One of the things is, it's okay. This is the sort of metaphor that I'll use when I feel like I've got a link in the chain of reasoning correct. Imagine you have an incomplete puzzle, and then you just put the right piece in, and it fits. It fits, but the fitting part, since this is not a puzzle, is a feeling. It feels right. And so it's the piece that got put in, and it was put in the right spot because it felt right. And, that would be like putting a piece of a puzzle into an incomplete puzzle. Some people just have it and some people don't. And some people have it to different measure or in different areas. So again, going to a sea captain, right? You might have a sea captain that thinks like I think, but his insight isn't about, arcane historical knowledge, but navigating the three-dimensional space of sailing on the sea. But again, and you'll hear this too, right? People who think like that will say that it felt right, not in some sort of like trite, hippie thing, but like it's in the right place. It fit, and paying attention to that is what is going to, for the people that have those skills and gifts, that is going to be important for them to be able to see the pattern and then do that. And again, it gives you a fundamental advantage over the crowd that just seeks to measure, because it's immanent knowledge. You don't have to reason through a long list of syllogisms. It's just there. A sort of related topic is, I've already mentioned this with Sherlock Holmes in another context, but reasoning backwards, right? We have a known quantity and we're trying to understand how it got there. So again, the example is that of a dead body, right? You call in the coroner and he's going to tell the police probable cause of death, probable time of death from the observations that he makes. And then you take that line of reasoning and then you reason back with it. So the thing is already there, right? You're not justifying the existence of the corpse. It's there. I mean, you're just reasoning an explanation for it. In an analogous sense, we have this real tactile, knowledge, if you will, the feeling, which is just imminent. Now, of course, somebody's going to say that, well, feelings can mislead. Yes, but so can measurements. In an analogous way to correcting mistakes in measurement through observation, through trial and error, through taking the appropriate steps, you can also change and modify your feelings so that you can figure out, okay, that was just noise. That was a distraction. That was a feeling that didn't really point to anything at all. But this one does point to something. Because usually what ends up happening, right, is if you're in a high stress environment, there's going to be a lot of confused feelings that are generated inside of you based on your body's reaction to the stress. But if you have like this overarching signal of intuition and insight, that can easily get drowned out by the sense of unease and fear. And you listen to that rather than the true feeling that you should be listening to because it got drowned out. That can happen. And so one, if it's possible, get out of the high stress environment. That's one thing you can do. Or if you can't, find a way to quiet that signal down so you can actually hear or listen or feel, whatever analogy you want to use, the real thing. So let's just sort of summarize what we've talked about already. The idea that Dawkins represents, Mr. Modem Man Dawkins, is that the only thing that we can have is measurement. Anything that can't be measured isn't real. And of course, measurement here is narrowly, this measuring physical stuff. So half the world's not real, guys. And you're just going to have to live this schizophrenic, bifurcated life and say and do stupid things like Dawkins does and other scientists today. Feeling can be one of two kinds. It can be the tactile sense of feeling on the skin, or this intersubjective feeling when we say feelings, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling sick, or I'm feeling cold. Both of which can tell us about the world. You can feel your way out of a room if you're blindfolded. You can feel the elephant up like the men in the thumbnail. Or you can realize that what you ate was bad by having a stomachache afterwards. And then it tells you don't eat that food again. Okay, feelings matter. And then the intersubjective one, I think, is even more powerful. It's insight, it's intuition. It tells you things about the world that you wouldn't really be able to know any other way. And in many cases, on the scientific level, you shouldn't know, but you do. We'll call it the Han Solo effect. So there's that. And this idea that we don't listen to that we don't listen to the feelings means that we miss half the world, half the picture. At least a lot of antisociality, I guess what you call autism, if you want to call it that. But these sort of antisocial behaviors that we're seeing all over the place now. And it's just drilled into us. Don't listen to these things. Now, somebody might say, well, what about the flip side on the left? Where, someone like the conservatives will say facts don't care about your feelings. But here, what are the feelings these people are listening to? They're not really listening to the feelings I'm talking about. A lot of these, quote, feelings are the result of them identifying with all of the warnings that their body is giving them, right? They're in stressful situations. They're nervous. They're afraid. They're scared. They're angry. They're listening to those. And I mean, those are real emotions, those are real feelings, but whatever, truth that they have, whatever true feelings they might have that actually do tell them something about the world as a whole, they're not listening to because it's being drowned out by all these other voices. And they act on them and they later regret it because these are, wrong decisions to make. But again, that's how feelings can lead you astray. But they properly understood, they'll lead you to not only truth about the world, I mean, certainly truth about yourself, but also truth about other people, right? There's also people that say, well, this person who, you have a bad feeling about this person. It turns out the guy might be a criminal, or the guy might have some, very undesirable traits that, because you listened to your friend and didn't maybe bring him into your business circle, you spared yourself a lot of headache. Again, real stuff about the world. And again, I'm not saying measurement isn't real. Measurement's important. A captain of a ship should be able to measure to go from port to port and navigate the seas, but he should also be able to intuit the world around him through some sort of sixth sense. So I guess, when to sum it up, being sort of tuned into these higher realities around you, are you tuned into what I call the divine superstructure, for lack of a better word, Plato's forms, or are you tied into the lying emotions that are the result of stress and pain and propaganda and all the other things? That's where most people are trusting their feelings today, and that's disastrous. Every bit as disastrous as pretending feelings don't matter at all. But they don't have any tools to separate that from, feelings that tell them about the truth in the world. All right, everybody, we have, let's see here, Baron Gimli von Garden for $5 US. Thank you. I have a feeling this will be a good stream. Make it reality. Well, I tried. Let's see. Connor Rafferty, National Populist. I'm a refugee from AA's channel. I've been oppressed there. Hello, Cyber Ninja Zero. Hello. Baron Gimli von Garden. Dawkins appears not to believe in intuition. Yep. Actual physical kelp. Hello. Yeah, Baron Gimli von Garden. Unless I can put it on a spreadsheet, it isn't real. I know, right? And then the people that don't care, the feelings that don't care about your facts, come crashing in, and that's called the woke. and of course, the scientific establishment is completely unable to do anything about it. They just completely colonized everything, and they're just sitting there not knowing what to do. Record Deepness, Manoa, and Jorge Punza. Hello. Let's see. Record Deepness. Dabney certainly had a prophetic insight. Prophetic insight. Yes, he did. Actual physical kelp. Amos 3:7 is true. Well, it's a Bible verse, so I'm going to look it up. Amos 3:7. All right. Surely the Lord God does nothing unless he reveals his secrets to his servants, the prophets. Yes. That is true. Baron Gimli von Garden again. Ben Shapiro says that facts don't care about your feelings. Let's consider this. First, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light. Second, facts are a subset of truth. Therefore, Jesus is facts. Third, Jesus loves you. Fourth, when you love someone, you care about their feelings. Therefore, Jesus cares about your feelings. Thus, we can conclude that facts do care about your feelings, and Shapiro is an echo. Sure. Bren, understanding the patterns that govern reality, that's just what the Bible poetically explicates, although impossible to understand from a non-materialist perspective. That's so good, it's got to go up on the screen. Absolutely. And that's, of course, the power of myth and religious texts and poetry. Mutant number 12, hello. Then Seamus Aofi, hello. Our sense of aesthetics seems to show this strongly. Record Deepness. I've been rereading That Hideous Strength lately. Lewis understood modernity in the 20th century better than probably anyone from the 21st. Yeah, Lewis, That Hideous Strength is the sort of like literary companion to The Abolition of Man. The ideas that Lewis describes in The Abolition of Man as discussed in the sort of technical sense are then sort of made manifest poetically in That Hideous Strength. This is why it's one of his best works, because of that. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast, signing off.